All right there. Hey, data lovers, and welcome to another episode of I Love Data Fridays here at the International Data Evaluation Center on the campuses of the Ohio State University. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 49 of I Love Data Fridays. It seems like it has been forever since we've had a full episode of I Love Data Fridays. Of course, we've had all those short episodes since August with all of our data collection changes. But today, I am excited to tell you that we have a new addition to I Love Data Fridays, and it is called What Do the Data Say? And this is where we take some analysis with our data, and we put it in front of myself and a guest, and we talk about what the data actually tell us. And so today, we'll be examining implementation, putting numbers to our assumptions, and I will have a special guest with me today, as you see on the screen, and I will introduce her here in just a moment. But first, hey, who's talking data to you? Well, of course, you've got me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director and Co-Principal Investigator here at the International Data Evaluation Center. And I will be joined by Dr. Lindy Harmon, Reading Recovery Trainer from the University of Kentucky. And as I said, we are going to be examining implementation, putting numbers to our assumptions. So what do you mean, Jeff? Well, in reading recovery, we certainly have certain beliefs and assumptions about implementation. So we know that in reading recovery, our goal is to get to full implementation in a school. So every child who needs reading recovery can get reading recovery. And we have these beliefs or assumptions about, as we add teachers to an implementation, what those effects should be. And we certainly have real life observations or what we've seen happen as we add teachers to an implementation. But do the numbers actually back up what we claim? Do we find out anything interesting? So today we're going to be examining these assumptions, and we're going to be looking at different scenarios to try to answer these questions. Now, just a couple production notes. I need everyone to know that I lost the windscreen on my microphone. And you're like, well, Jeff, why is that important? Well, it's important because occasionally you'll hear something that sounds like wind blowing across the microphone, and that's just actually me breathing into the mic. And that windscreen helps prevent that. So I've tried to eliminate that, but if you hear me breathing into the mic, I'm sorry, I don't mean it. We just lost my windscreen. We've got a new one on order. Also, you'll hear me talk to Lindy in there, a couple slides that I changed some content on her based on some feedback that I got prior to our recording. I sent Lindy some slides and a pre-recording of everything, and then someone gave me some great feedback, and I changed stuff on her. It didn't change it in any bad way. It just made the data a little easier to talk about, but you'll hear me apologize to Lindy in there. I didn't mean to change it on her, but they were great changes. They were good changes that I think helped tell the story. So now, these slides that you're going to see, they're sort of structured like Lindy and I are giving a presentation at a social science conferences. So when you go to a conference, you talk about the background of why you're trying to show this. You talk about your methodology of how you did it. You talk about the research questions that you have. You talk about the study groups that you examined during here. And it's all about showing our work. So we're showing our work. So the first half of this interview is actually mostly me talking, showing my work. And if you want to skip over to the second half, where it's mostly Lindy providing a lot of great commentary and feedback to me, there's a link down in the comments section where you can click on it and skip to that section half. But if you want to see the work behind it too, you can just watch through the whole thing. And then finally, Lindy provided me with some great critiques and feedback throughout this whole interview we did together. And I wish I could have included everything, but you'll notice that sometimes when she gives me some feedback and critique, it seems to kind of charge on forward, and that's just because I've edited things for sort of this continuity and clarity and moving things forward in a linear fashion. But man, I wish I could have put it all in there, because the great thing about one of the hallmarks of good research is getting that critique and feedback from colleagues and then incorporating it into future research. All right, folks, let's get to it and let's talk a little data. I love Data Friday! All right, Lindy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, hi, I am Lindy Harmon. I am the trainer at University of Kentucky. I work with the Kentucky teacher leaders and teachers. We have around 20 teacher leaders in Kentucky, and we always maintain around 400 teachers. I have a partner in Kentucky, Dr. Judy Embry, who is the director of the University Training Center. I have been in reading recovery for over 20 years. I stopped counting at 20. I have been a teacher leader, and a trainer, so I understand everybody's pain. I also have served as RRCNA president, and I currently serve as treasurer of RRCNA. And I guess that's about it, Jeff. That's who I am.
All right. Well, thank you, Lindy, for joining us today. I'm so happy to have you. I've been looking forward to talking some data. So like I said earlier in our introduction, we have our new section to I Love Data Fridays. It's called What Do the Data Say? Today, we'll be examining implementation and putting some numbers to our assumptions. And you're probably wondering, Jeff, what assumptions are you talking about? So let's get right into that. We know that one of our goals in reading recovery is that we work towards that full implementation. You know, every child who needs reading recovery gets reading recovery. In general, and Lindy, I'm very broadly saying what our assumptions are. And I know they can be a little more nuanced, but that, you know, in general, like when we add a reading recovery teacher to a school that needs more teachers, that, you know, in general, we see this increase in capacity, our capacity to serve. And then sort of similarly, if we remove a teacher from a school where there still is a need, we see this decrease in capacity and some sort of detrimental effects that come along with this. When schools are fully implemented, we know that, or we believe, our belief and our assumption is that, you know, what we see sort of holds steady over time, that reading recovery becomes this like little finely tuned machine and has a predictable output that we should see every year. And then finally, in these scenarios where we sort of where we're under implemented, where schools have a need, but we don't increase the number of teachers to meet that need, our under-implemented schools sort of show signs of what I'm just calling like detrimental effects. So as I went through like the reading recovery literature, I wasn't able to define like a real systematic approach to looking at implementation. A lot of times I kind of found articles that fell into like 3 categories, and they were usually like these anecdotal stories about implementation, which are good. Then there was other stories about how to improve and how to advocate for your implementation. And then we finally got down to like some case studies involving single school districts that were showing data. And unfortunately, these last two articles are almost 20 years old. They're a little out of date. And like I said, the analysis sort of focused on like a one-way scenario, which is fine. I mean, they're like these success stories. But they sort of lacked some school level results. So what I'm but what we looked at this analysis that Lindy and I are going to talk about today is that we did a more systematic analysis using current national data and comparing different implementation scenarios, kind of like those scenarios I described above, to test our assumptions about what happens at our schools. All right, Lindy, did I set that up okay?
Yeah, that sounds great, but I have 2 questions.
Okay.
One is your second bullet and third bullet, where one of the assumptions is adding a reading recovery teacher increases capacity, and vice versa, removing a reading recovery teacher decreases capacity. I'm wondering if capacity is the right word that you want to use there. Because the assumption of increasing capacity to me means just increasing the raw number of children that can be served. Well, of course it does. If you take a teacher out, it decreases the number, and if you put a teacher in, it increases the number. I'm wondering if what you're really trying to get at there is performance. Yes, we know that if you put another teacher in the building, we're going to serve more kids. But this is not really what the assumption is. We know that. But what we're really looking at, what's really fascinating is, does increasing capacity therefore improve performance?
Now, folks, I'm gonna stop us right here real quick, and I'm gonna say you're gonna see that these slides are sort of structured like we're at a social sciences conference, and we're gonna talk about the data we used, our methodology, our research questions. If you just kind of want to get straight to the facts and the results at the end, I'm gonna put the time marker both here right now and down in the comments where you can skip ahead and look at the results. But Lindy and I are going to plow ahead with the rest of our slides to set everything up here. All right, so we looked at, to do this, we used national data, reading recovery data for 3 years. So we went from 2016-17 to 2018-19, and we only included schools that had 3 years of continuous data. We specifically looked at schools where we had teachers, reading recovery teachers, carrying a full load of students each year. So about 7 to 10 students per year. This way we sort of eliminated schools that, maybe were fully implemented, but maybe somebody went on a maternity leave or something happened where loads shifted 1 year from the other. We wanted to look at schools that were predictable in their implementations across these 3 years. So we had 4 study groups, and the first study group are schools that increase the number of teachers at the school to meet a need. So these are schools where the number of teachers increased from year 1 to year 2 in the study, and they may have increased in year 3 as well. Their year 1 data indicated a need for more teachers, and their year 2 data indicated that they've had enough teachers in that second year. Our second study group, we looked at schools that decreased the number of reading recovery teachers despite having a need. So you'll see that teachers decreased from year 1 to year 2, and they may have also decreased in year 3. Their year 1 data indicated that the school had enough teachers, and then by years 2 and 3, or both years 2 and 3 data indicated they needed additional teachers in the school. Our third group, schools that had 1 teacher but needed more. So schools that had 1 teacher all 3 years, but the data indicated they needed more teachers in years 1, 2, and 3. And then finally, our last group are schools that had enough teachers to meet their needs. So these are schools where the number of teachers stayed the same across all 3 years, and the data indicated that they had enough teachers to meet the need in years 1, 2, and 3. All right, so we have 4 research questions that we looked at. And our research question one was, how does the total number of students served per school change over time for each group? Our research question 2, how does the number of students making accelerated progress change over time for each group? Our research question 3, how does the number of first-round students receiving 20 weeks of instruction change over time for each group? And then our final question, how does the number of students reaching text level 16 by year end change over time for each group?
Okay, so I see how your research questions link up with your list of assumptions from that first slide now, Jeff.
Yeah.
So question 1 is really focused on capacity, just the raw numbers of increasing or decreasing numbers of students.
Yeah.
And then your last 3 research questions line up very nicely with your performance-based assumptions. Sure. Okay.
As I was reviewing this with people, some people are asking me, why did we specifically choose text level 16 at the year end? Statistically, we see text level 16, marks the start of Stay 9-4, the start of our average band at the end of the school year. We also know, Jeff Williams in his article from the Journal of Reading Recovery, also showed us that students who are at 16 or higher have developed this flexible working system, which allows them to be independent or to independently improve as readers. So moving on to our methodology here, you certainly heard in our study groups, me using the terminology, there's a need at the school. So how did we define that need? we developed what we called like a school need ratio. And for the purposes of this slide, I'm just calling it R. And R is a calculation where we looked at the number of reading recovery teachers in a school. So we know that from our data, how many teachers were in a school. And we divided that by the number of students needing reading recovery. So teachers report that to us on our building data page, how many kids need reading recovery at the school. And it gives you a decimal or ratio. If the decimal ratio is between 0.091 and a 1.67, it means that the school's needs are being met. This is equivalent to saying there are 7 to 10 students needing reading recovery per reading recovery teacher at the school. If R was less than or equal to the 0.091, it means that needs are not being met. So there's 11 or more students needing reading recovery per reading recovery teacher at the school. To help, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, wow, that's pretty impressive that we can define full implementation in that way. I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's much easier for teachers to understand what their goal is.
One of the hard things sometimes about like doing this kind of analysis is like it's easy for us in when we say we want to serve 7 to 10 students or something, it's easy to say that, but to define it mathematically at times, it's not that it's challenging, but it can be tricky. And like, how do you define that and add in some wiggle room? My words are failing me this morning, but you know, it was an interesting little exercise. I'll say it like that. So for each of our research questions, we by study group we used year 1 as a baseline of comparison, and we computed a school mean or an average and a standard deviation for the change in the number of students. So we looked at how the number of students in each of those research questions changed when you compared it year 2 to year 1 and year 3 to year 1. And then we performed a significant test between the years just to see if the changes we saw were significant. And then we looked at the effect size to give us an idea of how large or small the changes were between the years as well. I love data watchers here. Just so you know, statistical significance, you're going to hear me say things are either statistically significant or not statistically significant. I just need you to know that statistically significant does not mean the difference is big. All right? So when we say these two differences are statistically significant, the difference is, it doesn't mean the difference between them is big. What it's implying is when something is statistically significant, it means that the difference is not random, that it's not noise in the data, that the difference that we're seeing is a real difference in the data, whether it's a small difference or a big difference, that the difference we're seeing is actually real and it's not random. Okay, now we're going to really get into some data here. Woo! Are you ready, Lindy?
I'm ready.
All right. So this is just a quick look at the participants in this analysis. One thing that I do want to point out that we do have a bit of a study group size imbalance. So there's one line for each of our participants in the study here, each of our study groups. And you can see in our first study group we had 18 schools, the next one had 31, and then it jumps up to 373 and 397. I just wanted everyone to be aware of the study group size imbalance, and I think it's just a characteristic of our schools. We don't have school implementations that are changing all of the time. I think it's telling us that we have a lot of steady or unchanging implementations and few implementations that are changing with any sort of regularity. But what's important is that the number of students in each of the group aligns with the study group characteristics. So, for example, what's important is that in this first study group where we've increased the number of teachers to meet the need of the school, you'll see in year 1 they served 156 students, but in years 2 and 3 they served around 300. So you saw that capacity go up to meet that need. And you'll see the same characteristics for the rest of the study groups, that it matches the study group characteristics. All right. So, Lindy, I have to admit, I've changed this next slide on you. I've just presented it in a different way. I got some feedback between the last time that we talked and this time, so I apologize. But it's presenting the exact same information. So everyone out there, if you hear Lindy sighing, it's because I changed something on her, and it's all my fault. But it's the same stuff. We're looking at our summary findings here, and you'll see one row for each of our study groups. Study groups, we're looking at the number of students served. If we go across the columns, the number of students served, the number of students who made accelerated progress, the number of children receiving 20 weeks of instruction, and the number of children or students who are reaching at least a text level 16 by the end of the school year. And these numbers represent the change in the number of students at a school level. When we increase the number of reading recovery teachers to meet the need at a school, we see that school is able to serve 8 more students per year. They're able to get 4 additional students to make accelerated progress, and they're able to have 3 additional students get 20 weeks of instruction, and 5 additional students reach text level 16 by the end of the school year. So this isn't a surprise, right, Lindy? This confirms what we...
This is very good news. It's just good to see the data to back up what we already knew to be true.
Yeah. And the 3 asterisks are just telling us that these results are statistically significant, meaning that this is not noise in the data, that these are real differences that we're noticing.
Changes in performance, and that's what we're after, right?
Yeah. If we go to the next line, so this is a scenario where the school decreased the number of reading recovery teachers despite having a need. And essentially what you see is an almost exact mirror effect, where instead of increasing, there's 8 less students being served, total students being served, 4 less students making accelerated progress, 2 less students getting that 20 weeks of instruction, and 5 less students reaching text level 16 by the end of the school year. Once again, confirming what we see in real life, right?
Right, absolutely.
Okay, the next one, and I should have put this one last because I think is this the one you want to talk to me about? You were going to talk to me about it something earlier, and I stopped you. I was like, don't tell me about it yet. But, well, here, let me go through the results first instead of getting ahead. So this is the scenario where we had 1 reading recovery teacher, but we needed more at the school. And what we see, so the implementation has stayed the same over the 3 years, but they just have this need. There's a need for more reading recovery teachers. And what we see by year 3, the number of students that they're able to serve decreases slightly. Now you're like, Jeff, what does 0.3 students mean? It means that some schools maintained their capacity, but you had more schools that lost a little bit of capacity to serve reading recovery students. I'm not saying it's a drastic amount of capacity. There was some sort of detrimental effect happening that the teacher wasn't able to serve a full load of students. For accelerated progress and 20 weeks of instruction, there wasn't any statistically significant change. It essentially stayed the same. But we saw an additional decrease in the number of students, a small but statistically significant decrease in the number of students reaching that text level 16 by the end of the school year. So once again, by year 3, and this was by year 3. Year 2, there wasn't any statistically significant change, but it showed up in year 3.
And it could be, Jeff, if you have 1 reading recovery teacher, but you need more, I could see some schools needing more teachers, but perhaps they have moved that teacher into doing more small group instruction to reach more children because the school can't afford to train an additional teacher, and they want more children served. We get that. We hear that a lot in the field.
Yeah.
And so it does impact the capacity of that teacher to serve a full 8 students a year. If perhaps that teacher had to get a waiver to teach only 3 kids, or maybe she only could teach 2 kids because the rest of her day was taken up by teaching small groups to reach more students. We hear lots of stories like that from our implementations.
So I'm hoping that these numbers confirm what people feel. I'm purposely using the word there's some sort of detrimental effects happening. I don't know what those detrimental effects are. But as you say, this is what people feel in the field, and this is how it plays out in the numbers. It's confirmed by the numbers is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I really don't like that word detrimental, sorry, but
what's a better word?
It just implies that, that we can show cause and effect, and I'm not sure we're there yet. But
you're right. Okay, yes.
But what you might consider changing detrimental is a very judgmental term. So maybe you could say something like impact on outcomes, impact on
yes.
results or performance.
And then finally, our last scenario where we had enough teachers at the school to meet capacity, we essentially saw no significant change over the 3 years of the implementation, which is not surprising.
Sure.
We would be surprised if it had changed in some meaningful way.
Yeah, we would not be happy about that because we want full implementation and no change in our results when we get there. So That's good. That stands to reason.
All right, Lindy, before I go on to the next slide, is there anything you want to discuss about this?
It is nice to reinforce, like you said, our assumptions and our beliefs about what strong implementation, what impact that has on performance. And I think what you're showing is it does have an impact. I'm wondering, you didn't do any kind of sorting of teachers in these buildings so that we would know who are new teachers and who are experienced teachers? You haven't sorted the data that way, right?
No, in fact, you've hit on one of my limitations that I'll talk about. I'll show at the end. We didn't really control for existing versus new, and the other thing that we didn't control for were a school might have had 2 teachers through the entire 3 years of this analysis. Were they the same teachers? We didn't look at that either. Maybe they...
Yeah, and see, that could really impact your data. And the other thing I was thinking is you also probably haven't yet isolated what else was going on in those schools.
Right, yeah.
To see if there were what kind of small group instruction was taking place in those schools, what kind of professional development those teachers were providing to classroom teachers or literacy coaches or special education teachers or anyone else in the building. All of those things could have an impact on our numbers.
All right, well, let me move on to the next slide here, and I'll offer my conclusions, and then, Lindy, I'm curious to see how much you agree or disagree or want to add to this. I mean, you've already added a little bit to it, so I feel safe to say that when you add a reading recovery teacher, in general, it increases our overall capacity to serve students, and it increases the number of independent readers that, a school is able to get ready for second grade.
This is pretty amazing, really.
Oh, good.
I'm so happy that, we have in reading recovery, we've always believed this to be true, but we've never really had the data to say, oh, yes, this actually is true. This is the way it happens. We've always believed that it happened, but we've never had data. So that's really important, I think.
Okay. And then similarly, when we removed that teacher from a reading recovery implementation, it decreases the overall capacity to serve students, and it decreases the number of independent readers, preparing readers for second grade. I've summed up the last 2 scenarios sort of in one bullet here, but we see that when we maintain the number of teachers, that in general doesn't affect the school's capacity to serve students and produce independent readers, except in our under-implemented schools. So we saw in our under-implemented schools that in that year 3, our capacity to serve students overall dropped just by a little, and the number of kids that are reaching text level 16 by year 3. I think what I pointed out earlier, one of our limitations is sort of a study group size imbalance, and unfortunately it's just, I think, a characteristic of reading recovery implementations in general. It would be nice to have a larger sample of students in our 2 groups where we increased or decreased to help balance that out. And I think, as I said, we didn't control for schools that were already implemented versus new implementations, because that certainly can affect things. We didn't control for schools where teachers changed from one year to the next.
But that's really those are really, to me, when I look at those limitations, those are very positive limitations for us in reading recovery, because that study group size imbalance, the highest number are the consistent implementations, consistently fully implemented.
Oh, yeah.
So that's not a negative in my mind. And controlling for schools that are newly implemented or have been historically fully implemented. I mean, I don't know how you would ever do that.
Yeah, well, that's tomorrow. We'll figure that out tomorrow. But
yeah, that'll be the next day today. And then I do think this one where you could control for teachers changing from one year to the next, but honestly, I don't know how you do that either. But that would be a good thing to do in the next study. One of the things I would like to, is your next slide going to be, what are we going to do next? Because now I'm so excited about this data. I want to get on to what's the next study that you're going to look. Okay.
Yeah. Do that. And I just threw out 2 bullets here. I think, to me, like, one of the things that we might do is like a further analysis of these under-implemented schools over a longer period of time. We looked at 3 years, but what if we looked at 5, 6, 7 years and see how things played out over those, that longer time period?
I think this is so important. Mary Freed for many, many years has been saying we need to look at our schools that get on board, they get to full implementation, and historically for years and years, they maintain that strong implementation. And we need to be comparing those to these schools who get in and train one teacher, but then it doesn't go any further. They don't add another reading recovery teacher. They don't add training for literacy coaches. They don't add literacy lessons. They don't sort of work on their implementation any further than just having one teacher. And what are the differences between those 2 schools? I think the I3 report got into some of that sort of thing on implementation, but I'm not sure that it went far enough. So that would be a really good additional research for us, outlining those characteristics of those schools that get on board and stay on board for a long period of time. Reading recovery is a systemic intervention. I mean, our real goal is to really go into a school and systemically change the literacy instruction in that school and really undergird it and support it. And so to get that type of systemic change in a school or district, you really can't have a lot of under-implemented schools or one teacher per school. You really need to be implementing based on need, just like your research is showing us. Your data analysis is showing us. I would also, like I said, I'd like to see some study of what's going on. And I think you're doing this, Jeff, aren't you? Aren't you having some adding some new questions to the data set for this coming year? New questions around other interventions or small group interventions going on in those reading recovery schools?
Yeah, we
did I misread?
No. We have 2 new questions on the building data page. One is what are the curriculums being used in K through 3, and people can indicate up to 3. And then what are the other, was it tier 2 and tier 3 interventions happening in the school, and they can indicate up to 2 or 3 of those different interventions besides reading recovery. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So you're going to have a lot of data next year that you can really go further with this data analysis, because all of those things impact. Even though Dr. Clay says reading recovery is not dependent on one specific curriculum, we can work with any curriculum in any building. There are some curriculums where we work better, and they dovetail very nicely into Clay's theory. And it's like, it's getting the right people on the bus, Jeff. When you get everybody going in the same direction, I mean, you can just almost move mountains. And we see it in schools all the time, especially schools like your data analysis shows that are consistently fully implemented. Some schools are over implemented, and they just use those extra people as literacy coaches, as literacy lessons teachers. They're doing PD with the classroom teachers, and everybody is doing and saying the same things. We see great success in those buildings. So maybe this line of data analysis is really going to help us to, if we have something we can hang on to and take into a principal and say, here's how we want to change the literacy instruction in your school. Here's how we want to improve your performance. That would be tremendous, Jeff. So I'm thrilled with this. I think it's amazing.
Oh, well, good.
Well, it's sort of like the difference between going in and speaking to a principal and saying, we know that this happens, and being able to put something under that principal's nose that says, you're going to get this many more children ready for second grade. You're going to get this many more children served who has a self-extending system and can go on. I mean, you're really providing that data and that proof for us. That's a big difference, especially now with principals. That everybody's about the data. They want to see. We know that this is what you believe, but we want to see proof. And in schools where we're fully implemented, we have that proof. I mean, I usually have to go to those schools and look up their state scores and try to gather some data from the principal in those buildings in order to help the teacher leaders get to full implementations like theirs. But this would be nice if this would be something that IDEC could actually collect this data for us and show us in this way.
Yeah, I was wondering if...
And it's another way for IDEC to sort of serve your customers. We're your customers. And so as far as I'm concerned, the more data that you can analyze like this and help me to get out and improve implementations, I think the better it is for reading recovery.
I was like having this thought as you were kind of going through all of this. I'm like, okay, now we need like a pamphlet or a flyer to stick.
I mean, you don't think about it all the time, but this is a great advocacy and outreach. This information is when you can show this, and trust me, this is what schools are looking for. It's interesting too to me, the fact that you defined your categories with schools that just maintain low implementation over time and schools that actually cut implementation, even though they have a need there. So those two implementations, I guess my question would be, why would you do that as a principal or a superintendent? Why would you cut if you already had established that you have a need? And it could be something very simple that they don't understand with data, what you've just shown us. They don't understand that. And so that data could be just as valuable to us as the positive data coming from our fully implemented schools. Did I explain myself well enough?
Yeah, no, yeah. No, I think
I don't know that they always use or have data readily available to say, if I take this reading recovery teacher out of this building and cut back to one, what is it going to do to the kids in this building? And I think your data on those schools can show us, we can show that to our principal and say, well, Okay, go pick out the 5 kids that you do not want ready for 2nd grade. You know what I mean?
Oh man, I'm ready to work on this pamphlet now.
I know it. I know. This is really good. It's really good. And I can't wait until you can add this data. I can't wait to see information and data on classroom instruction and the other small group interventions going on in these buildings. I really want to see what kind of impact that has on these numbers that you already have established. So your data says your data says under implemented schools by year 3 see a decline in performance. Is that what you would come away from this report with?
I would. I mean, I think that's a good way of saying it. Like the averages tick down even year 2, but the significance test says that it's noise. But it's year 3 that it all of a sudden says, yep, there's a real change happening here. It's a small change, but the change is real.
Very good. Wow.
All right.
This is impressive, Jeff. I like it. I really like it.
Thank you. This was It's been an adventure so far. And
okay, one thing you got to add, Jeff.
Yeah.
On this additional research, you got to do further analysis of under implemented schools over a longer period of time. And I would also say, instead of just focusing on under implemented, I think you need to do further analysis of consistent long-term implementations, full implementations.
Oh,
you know what
okay.
I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
I would really like to see who those schools are and what kind of impact we're having in those places, because I know here in Kentucky we have several school districts that have been in reading recovery for over 20 years.
Okay.
And you know, what differences have it made? How can we pull some of those impacts out from those districts and learn something from those districts?
Okay. Another item on the to-do list there. That's a good one. I actually like that. All right. Well, Lindy, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining me with I Love Data Fridays and our new What Do the Data Say series. I appreciate your feedback that you've given me throughout this. Even if some of it I edited out in the final edit, I want everyone to know that Lindy has given me lots of good feedback here and everything. So I might be adding a few more bullets. Well, not. We're going to add a few more bullets to our additional research stuff. So I hope you enjoyed yourself too, Lindy.
I did, and I learned a lot, and I really appreciate you, Jeff, doing all this analysis for us, because, again, we do not have time, nor do I have the desire to do analysis. So the fact that you enjoy that is really, you know, that's really a positive for me. You enjoy it. You just share it with me. I'll ask you questions about it. I like this setup.
That's good. All right. Sounds good. All right, Lindy. Well, we'll talk to you later, and I'm sure I'll be calling you again for some more either how do you do data or what do the data say sections.
Okay. Sounds good, Jeff. Thank you.
Yep. All right, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of I Love Data Fridays and What Do the Data Say with Dr. Lindy Harmon from the University of Kentucky. Now, I forgot to show my references at the end of the recording there, so here are my references that I showed during some of our slides in there. I'll pause for a second if you want to look at them. Moving on, so I will say, hey, thank you for watching this episode of I Love Data Fridays. Don't forget to subscribe so you get a notification about all of our I Love Data Fridays and IDEC videos. So we'll cue the music and I will say thank you for watching another episode of I Love Data Fridays, and thank you once again for Dr. Lindy Harmon and joining us for What Do the Data Say? And hey, we will talk data to you later.